welcome, dear listener, to the Sleeping Hourglass. Tonight we begin a journey not forward, but backward, to a time when the wind brushed across empty cobblestone streets, when the flicker of candlelight glowed in silent infirmaries, and when a distant bell tolled, not only for the dead, but for the shape of history itself. This is not just a tale of sickness, nor simply a story of rats and ruin. It is a story of movement, of fur and fleas, of ships and silence, of kings and commoners, all caught in the slow, black tide of the plague. If this story rocks your thoughts gently toward rest, you're welcome to support The Sleeping Hourglass by subscribing or leaving a kind word. It's never expected, but always deeply appreciated. Like a lantern left glowing in a window, just in case someone is still on the road. A small note before we begins. The year breathes gently in the east. It is spring along the Silk Road, and the wind moves like a ribbon through the high grasses of the steppe. In the market towns of Central Asia, traders speak in many tongues, exchanging silk for spices, jade for salt, and news for laughter. Horses stamp in the dust. Scribes ink letters beneath lanterns. Somewhere, a child sings to herself beside a clay hearth. And beneath it all, something stirs. Something too small to name, yet too old to ignore. A single cough breaks the rhythm of a caravan. It is nothing, they say. The man has travelled far. The nights were cold. He needs rest, nothing more. But that cough does not stay alone. Another follows, then another, and behind them, like the echo of hooves long faded, fever. Across the grasslands of Mongolia, the empire once ruled by Genghis Khan still holds threads of power, but they fray. The Yuan dynasty in China watches its borders nervously as unrest grows and nature rebels. Droughts harden the earth. Locusts blacken the skies. In the southern provinces, famine bruises the bellies of the poor. It is here, somewhere between famine and trade, empire and wilderness, that the plague finds its first breath. The marmot is a creature of the earth. It burrows, it chatters, it watches. To some, it is a nuisance, to others, a meal. But in the fur of one such creature, a flea drinks blood laced with something new. Something ancient. A bacterium, Yersinia pestis, no larger than a whisper, begins its slow campaign. The hunter who skins the marmot does not know. The merchant who buys the pelt does not know. The camel who carries the load does not know. But the disease knows. It clings. It waits. By 1331, in the provinces of Hubei and Hunan, whispers grow louder. Villages fall silent. Letters go unanswered. Chinese imperial records speak of pestilence, of hundreds, then thousands, dying in the space of days. But the world beyond does not yet listen. The East suffers in quiet isolation, its sorrows folded into the vast distances of geography and time. Still, the caravans move, from the Chinese borderlands to Samarkand, from Samarkand to Tabriz. The web of trade does not sleep. Ailing travellers are replaced. Goods are loaded anew. Time keeps walking forward. In the port city of Kaffa, perched on the edge of the Black Sea, where Genoese merchants trade beneath the banners of Christ and coin, the harbour sways with promise, Sacks of pepper and bolts of silk are carried from ships whose names no one will remember. Here, east kisses west. Here, the world narrows to a gateway. And here, the plague finds a ship. War stirs the air. The Mongol armies besiege the Genoese stronghold. It is not just arrows they hurl, but something darker. Tales, whether embroidered by fear or fact, speak of infected corpses catapulted over the city walls. The dead become weapons. The breath becomes blade. Inside coffer, panic simmers. Merchants and sailors, fearing both enemy steel and unseen sickness, flee. Ships unfurl their sails not in triumph, but in terror. But they carry more than memory. Rats scurry in the hold. Fleas bite fur. Flesh warms. Disease stirs. The sea wind is indifferent. The ships slip westward toward Constantinople, toward Sicily, toward the dreaming shores of Europe, and with them, something unseen and unstoppable glides forward. But Europe does not yet know. In the year 1346, the bells still ring for weddings. Wheat still sways golden in the fields of Provence. Children chase chickens in Venetian courtyards. Monks copy texts by candlelight, and kings worry over borders, not breath. There is still time to laugh, still time to believe in tomorrow. But in the East, silence is spreading, and not all silence is peace. It is a strange truth of history that sometimes the most world-changing events begin not with shouts, but with murmurs, not with trumpets, but with coughs. The world is not ready, but the tide is already rising. In the distance, sails appear on the horizon, quiet as ghosts, steady as fate. They carry more than cargo, and soon Europe will open its gates to ships it should have never welcomed. The sails strain against the wind, heavy with the urgency of escape. A Genoese ship pulls from the harbour of Kaffa, its hull groaning, its crew breathless with dread. Behind them, Mongol forces still gather outside the walls. But the threat that haunts this vessel is not made of men or arrows. It curls beneath the deck, furred and silent. It hides in barrels and behind sacks of grain. It squeaks softly as night falls, unseen, unheeded. Rats, rats in the rigging, rats in the shadows, and within the warmth of their fur, a darker passenger clings, the flea, too small to notice, too ancient to stop. The ship cuts through the Black Sea like a wound. The men above deck cough and murmur. Some lie down and do not rise again. A strange fatigue takes them, a swelling under the arms. The scent of sickness clings to the salted air. Still, the ship sails on, south toward Constantinople, then farther, to the islands, to the ports, to the waiting arms of Europe. It is October 1347. In Messina, on the island of Sicily, the sea glimmers with late autumn light. Fishermen call to one another across narrow docks. Children peer over stone walls to watch the ships come in. There is no fear in the air, only salt and gulls and the smell of figs. When the Genoese vessel arrives, it carries the illusion of normalcy. A ship like many others, returning from trade and war. But those who come near the ship sense something is wrong. The crew is pale, hunched. Some are too weak to leave their beds. Others are already dead. The authorities panic. The ship is ordered away, but it is too late. In the time it takes to tie a rope to a mooring post, rats have scurried onto land. In the time it takes to ask a question, a flea has jumped from fur to flesh. Messina is only the beginning. Across the blue skin of the Mediterranean, other ships follow. Some by accident, some by trade, others still by desperation. Each bears the same secret cargo. The rats, ever nimble, know no borders. The fleas, ever hungry, seek warmth. And the men aboard, coughing, dying, do not yet understand. In Marseille, France, the docks bustle. Olive oil, wine, wool, all pass from hand to hand with trust worn smooth by centuries of commerce. But now the goods come wrapped in silence. The air thickens, the markets thin. A merchant falls ill, then his wife. Then the neighbour who lent them bread. No one sees the rats. No one thinks to look for fleas, but the dying begins. In Tunis, the port glows with desert light. There is music in the streets, prayers from the towers. And then the ships arrive. The city, proud and ancient, is swift to suffer. The mosques fall silent. The storytellers retreat. And soon, the only tales left are whispered between graves. Venice watches the sea with suspicion. News has travelled. Fragmented, disbelieved. But the signs are there. A merchant who does not return, a letter gone unopened too long, rumours of swelling and blood, of sudden death. Still, the ships come. By January 1348, the lagoon begins to change. Gondolas carry not lovers or song, but bodies. The Doge consults physicians. Quarantines are declared. The word quarantagiorni, meaning 40 days, is born in this very fear. But the city is already marked. And so the map begins to darken. Not in ink, but in breath. Not with lines, but with silence. Each ship that flees one city brings death to the next. Each port that closes its gates cannot stop the wind, or the water, or the small, warm bodies that scurry in the dark. And still the people search for reason. Some say it is divine punishment, a judgment passed down on the wicked. Others blame foreign merchants, strangers with strange customs. A few speak of celestial alignments, of poisoned air, of imbalance in the humours of the body. But no one suspects the true culprits. The rat, the flea, the bacteria small enough to ride unseen across oceans. The rats do not care for prayer. The fleas do not fear kings. They move with patience, with purpose. They nest in the corners of homes, in the hay beside stables, in the cloaks of sleeping monks. And, wherever they go, the plague begins to bloom, black upon the skin, red in the lungs, cold in the hands. The ships, wooden, noble, proud, become like coffins adrift, and the sea that once promised trade, prosperity, and exploration becomes a silent accomplice to ruin. Europe watches, and still does not understand. But history, like tidewater, does not pause for comprehension. It arrives, it seeps, and by the time the mooring ropes are untied, by the time the last rat leaps to shore, the course has already changed. The plague has landed. The ships vanish over the horizon. But what they carried has already begun to walk the streets. Now across Europe's sacred thresholds, the bells begin to toll. The bell in Messina tolls once, then twice, not for a wedding, not for a feast, But for a fisherman's son, pale and still beneath a linen sheet, it is November 1347. The town is confused. A ship had come, yes, but ships come and go with the tide. This one left behind silence, and now the silence grows. A woman kneels in the alley behind her home, whispering to a child who cannot answer. In a monastery, the abbot watches 3 monks cough and burn with fever. By the docks, crates remain unopened. No one dares to touch the goods anymore. Still, the bell tolls. Again. Word moves quickly, though meaning lags behind it. By December, Marseille knows something is wrong. A priest scribbles the names of the dead into his ledger. Then he, too, stops writing. The wind, which once carried the scent of salt and bread, now carries the heavy breath of fear. And still ships arrive. In Tunis, winter comes with warm sands and cold dread. The mosques fall quiet. The bazaar, once bright with oranges and perfumes, grows hushed. The bodies come faster than the prayers, and the imams lower their voices. They say it is Allah's will. They say it is the end, but they cannot stop the dying. In Venice, the canals reflect the last light of a fading year. The Doge holds council. Quarantine is ordered. 40 days, 40 nights. A biblical echo cast in civic decree. But the gondolas still glide through the narrow waters. The rats still run along the ropes and beams. And every morning, more homes are shuttered from the inside. The bells ring differently now, not as a summons, but as an elegy. At first, it is the poor, always the poor, the ones who sleep close together, who drink from the same well, who share their bread and their breath. But soon it is the midwife, the merchant, the clerk who records the numbers no one wishes to read, then the bishop, then the physician, then the mayor's wife, who had not left her home in weeks. Panic does not arrive as screaming, it arrives in the refusal to open one's door. In the sudden absence of bread at the market, in the emptiness of the streets at midday, in the way people stop touching one another, even in grief, in cities that once echoed with trade, debate, song, and sermon. Now there is only one sound that repeats, the toll of bells, each ring a name, each ring a goodbye. But names begin to blur. Too many to remember, too many to record. The scribes can't keep up. The grave diggers falter. The priests run out of Latin for comfort. Even the weeping becomes silent, exhausted. In the quiet corners of these cities, children stare from windows. Their parents say nothing, too frightened or too fevered to explain. Some children wait for food that won't come, others for voices that will never return. Still, the ships keep coming. Still, the rats run ashore. Still, the fleas bite. Still, the blood darkens. No one knows what this sickness is. They call it mors nigra, the Black Death, not for its colour, but for its shadow. It makes the body bloom with swelling, black with rot. It steals the breath, the voice, the warmth. Some think it rides on the wind. Others think it hides in sin. The physicians argue about bad air, celestial misalignment, humours turned foul. But whatever it is, it moves faster than answers, and deeper than reason. In Messina, the bells have stopped. There is no one left to ring them. In Marseille, Dogs roam the streets, hungry and confused. In Tunis, smoke rises from hastily dug trenches. In Venice, silence becomes the city's new language. Still, the candle is lit. Still, the prayers are said. Still, the people, those who remain, look out across the sea and wonder, what has the world become? What more is to come? In the hush between bell tolls, another sound grows louder, the quiet gasp of breath that will not return. And now, we draw closer to the sickness itself, to the blood, the breath, and the breaking of the body. The body does not betray at first. It whispers, a heaviness behind the eyes, a faint ache in the limbs, a chill that doesn't quite leave even in the warmth of blankets or prayer. Then it sharpens, the throat thickens, the skin burns, a cough begins, dry at first, then wet, then red. And then comes the swelling. It begins in the groin, beneath the arm, along the neck, where the body hides its softness. Bulging nodes, tender and blackening, grow with unnatural speed. They pulse with heat, as if lit from within by some cruel lamp. These are the buboes. The word is strange on the tongue. So many have never heard it, and soon none will forget it. Within hours, the body changes. Spots the size of coins appear across the skin, first red, then purple, then black. The pulse quickens. Breathing grows shallow. The eyes glaze unseeing. And worst of all, the smell, not just of death, but of rot, of something ancient and wrong blooming beneath the surface. Even the dogs retreat. The sick lie curled in corners. Mothers press cloths to the heads of their children, not knowing that the closeness will doom them too. Lovers whisper prayers into mouths that no longer speak. The air hangs heavy, not just with grief, but with breath that carries more than words. No one understands. Not truly. The physicians arrive, cloaked in black, masked like crows. Their beaks are filled with lavender, rosemary, cloves, anything to sweeten the air they believe has turned foul. They carry long sticks, and with them, they prod the sick from a distance. Some open the buboes, hoping to drain the poison. Others bleed their patients with leeches. They recite Galen, Hippocrates, Scripture, the stars. But the plague does not read their books. It listens only to the blood. In Paris, the scholars at the Sorbonne debate, was it a corruption of the air? Was it sin, festering too long in the heart of mankind? Was it Saturn and Mars, crossing paths above the earth? They write treatises, they draw charts. They argue with ink-stained fingers. But outside the lecture halls, the bodies continue to fall. In Florence, a physician named Gentile da Foligno documents his observations with careful horror. He tries to describe the fever, the swellings, the bruising of the soul. His words tremble with hope. He dies a few weeks later. Even the wisest cannot escape. And those who survive, those rare and trembling few, are marked not just by luck, but by guilt. The survivors carry questions that medicine cannot answer. Why me? Why not them? Faith flickers. The priests move through the streets with trembling hands. Some continue their rites, whispering absolution into ears that no longer hear. Others abandon their posts, slipping away in the night, unable to reconcile mercy with magnitude. Confessionals sit empty. Altars gather dust. And behind closed doors, families grieve with no one to absolve them. But still, some hold fast. A mother presses her lips to her daughter's forehead and does not pull away, though she knows what it means. A monk stays by his brother's bedside until the last breath. A midwife washes a stranger's feet in silence, knowing she too is marked. Not all miracles come in the form of healing. Some arrive in the refusal to abandon love, even when it demands everything. And across the cities and countryside, a strange loneliness takes hold, not just from death, but from separation. The sick are left outside the walls. They are locked in their homes. Their names vanish from records, their faces from memory. They die without witness, without touch, without song. And those who remain, they begin to wonder if something inside them has died too. Because when the breath leaves someone you love and you cannot hold their hand, it feels as though the world itself forgets how to speak. The sickness is not just of the body, it is of the bond, of the breath between us, of the blood we share in story, in family, in faith. And now that thread begins to fray. The body bloats, the lungs fill, the light in the eyes dims, and still no one knows how to stop it. All they know is that the world is changing from the inside out. And as the bodies fall, so too does the rhythm of daily life, the pulse of commerce, of creativity, of beauty. Ahead, even the bright heart of Italy begins to dim beneath the ash. The heart of Europe beats warm in Italy, or once did. In Florence, light once poured from every window. Laughter spilled across tiled courtyards, and frescoes bloomed like spring upon monastery walls. This was a land of colour, of ink and marble, of invention and song, a place where ideas danced on parchment and wine flowed with conversation. But now, that light begins to dim, as if a great hand is drawing a veil over the sun. It begins with whispers, like wind rustling through olive trees. A merchant returns from the ports with a hollow look. A servant coughs and does not rise. And then the bells begin. Not for celebration, not for mass, but for death, again and again, tolling across rooftops like a quiet commandment. All things must end. In Florence, the streets grow still. The Arno continues to wind its way beneath bridges, but few cross now. Painters abandon their canvases mid-stroke. Bottles of ochre and lapis turn to dust beside brushes never lifted again. The workshops once filled with the scent of wood shavings and oil now smell only of smoke and rot. Even the Medici, powerful and proud, retreat behind heavy doors, their fortune unable to bribe the silence that deepens. Commerce falters like a heart skipping beats. Cloth goes unsold. Gold loses its glimmer. The bankers write fewer ledgers. The books of the dead grow thicker than the books of profit. On the doors of churches, someone carves black crosses. Inside, the pews are mostly empty. The priests still raise their hands, but fewer lips move in prayer. In Siena, the story is the same, only swifter. The plague strikes like lightning. Whole households vanish between sunset and dawn. The city had been in the middle of great works, a cathedral meant to outshine all others, ambitious and soaring. The marble lies abandoned now, half-hewn, surrounded by silence. Its arches, once meant for choirs and triumph, stand like the ribs of a great beast brought low. The plans are never finished. The tools rust where they were dropped. Stone dreams crumble alongside human ones. Painters try to make sense of it. In dim studios, Domenico and Pietro Lorenzetti put brush to panel. Their saints no longer gaze gently into heaven, but downward, towards suffering. Even the angels seem unsure. When the brothers fall ill and die, they leave behind not only art, but an echo, a visual record of a world unraveling. In Rome, the eternal city, the Tiber runs dark and indifferent. The seat of the Pope becomes a place of unease. Pilgrims arrive hoping for protection, miracles, mercy. But they bring sickness with them, and the sacred streets become arteries of death. The Vatican shutters some halls. Cardinals argue about divine punishment and natural cause. Yet still, the bodies accumulate. Even here, where marble emperors once ruled and saints were crowned, no immunity is granted. Throughout the countryside, villages vanish into quiet. The wheat is not harvested. The vines are not pruned. Carts creak with corpses on roads once filled with travellers and song. Sometimes they are left in the open. The graveyards full, the gravediggers gone. And yet, in the midst of ash, strange moments bloom. In Florence, a young writer named Giovanni Boccaccio begins to put quill to parchment. He flees to the hills, seeking refuge, but he cannot escape what he has seen. His Decameron begins not with romance, but with death. A city in collapse, friends lost, society unraveling, and then, within that frame of grief, he carves stories of love, wit, folly, and endurance. Even as the plague devours, he reminds us what it means to be alive. He is not alone. In ruined cloisters and half-empty cities, scribes copy psalms beside poems. Some paint small illuminations, golden suns amid black borders. A silent rebellion of memory begins, to remember joy amid sorrow, to mark beauty even as beauty flees. The Renaissance does not die. It sleeps. It curls like a leaf in winter, brittle, waiting. The minds that once burned bright with questions and sketches now burn with fever. But some survive, and when the fever breaks, years from now, they will remember. They will lift the brush, the chisel, the quill again. They will speak of darkness, yes, but also of light returned. Out of ash, something new will breathe. For now, though, Italy sighs under a heavy cloak. The windows stay shuttered. The fountains run, but no children splash in them. Time passes not in festivals, but in funerals. The cities that once shaped the soul of Europe now drift in fevered sleep. And yet, even silence has its song. In the dimming light of Rome and Florence, where statues watch over empty streets, the world holds its breath. Northward, across the mountains, the sickness creeps into another kingdom, where learning, faith, and fear will soon collide. And in Paris, the stars begin to blur. France, the land of reason and romance, now holds its breath. The Seine still wins its way through Paris, silver under the moonlight, but fewer lanterns dance along its banks. The bridges, once filled with poets and merchants, now carry fewer footsteps. The sounds of the city, bells, laughter, the murmur of markets, soften into something strange and muffled, as though the city itself listens for the approach of something it cannot name. In the heart of this hush stands the Sorbonne. Its towers rise proud above shuttered streets, a fortress of thought in a time when thought trembles. Inside, scholars debate. Candles flicker beside worn manuscripts. Their questions echo like prayer. Is this punishment? Is it planetary? Are we reaping what we've sown? Charts of stars are unrolled beside the scriptures. Ink-stained fingers trace the movements of Mars, then turn to the book of Job. The plague, they say, must have a cause, for the mind cannot bear what it cannot name. Outside the university walls, the people wait. Bakers come to market with fewer loaves. Horses pull quieter carts. Priests sprinkle holy water at corners where deaths have clustered. A kind of silence creeps across France, not just in voice, but in conviction. Even the crown, seated in opulence, feels the tremble of something deeper than discontent. King Philip VI tightens his grasp on the kingdom like a man gripping a sword in the dark. His court retreats into guarded rooms. He listens to advisors speak of quarantine, of closures, of curfews. But no edict, no coin, no armor can hold back what rides on breath and shadow. And so the court becomes still, not with peace but paralysis. Beyond the capital, the countryside begins to fracture. In Normandy, in Aquitaine, in the fields of Burgundy, peasants watch neighbors vanish. The rhythm of village life, planting, harvest, festival, stutters. Whole hamlets become hollow. The sound of the church bell no longer calls to mass, but tolls for the dead. Again and again. In monasteries, monks copy the names of the fallen until their hands ache. Then their own names are written by others. There are no hymns loud enough now, only whispered petitions. No incense thick enough, only smoke rising from too many funeral pyres. The intellectuals of Paris, faced with an invisible enemy, divide. Some blame the stars, others blame sin. Still others call for humility, for the silence of not knowing. Guillaume de Machaut, the poet and composer, writes verses that carry the weight of grief and beauty alike. His music drifts like mist through cathedral halls emptied by fear. His voice, soft yet sure, becomes a mirror, not of answers, but of sorrow understood. This is the moment France falters inward. The mind, so long its proudest banner, begins to fray. Knowledge cannot yet catch up to death. Faith, though fierce, does not shield every house. And fear slides in through the cracks, like water down stone, like mist across a mirror. And yet, the human soul resists erasure. In homes behind closed shutters, mothers hum lullabies they learned as children, now sung to comfort their own. Fathers kneel to patch roofs no longer watched by kings. In quiet defiance of despair, candles are still lit for evening prayer, bread is still broken, hands are still held. In some corners of Paris, laughter even returns, not because joy triumphs, but because endurance whispers. There is a dignity to this hush, a pause in the long breath of a nation, not a collapse, but a contraction, not an end, but an eclipse. And from that hush, new ways of seeing will eventually emerge. The scholars will revise their scrolls. The faithful will rebuild their trust. The farmers will touch the earth again with hope. But first they must endure the dark. The mind of France, like a lamp flickering in wind, bends low now. The thoughts that once lit cathedrals and codices now turn inward, seeking shelter. This is not yet the time of enlightenment. This is the time of survival. But even in this dimness, seeds of sound, seeds of resilience, seeds of silence, seeds of remembering, and far from Paris, along river banks and through wooded hills, the plague walks northward still, crossing invisible lines, winding toward fields and forests the crown cannot see. Beneath the silence of Paris, the roots of fear and wonder intertwine. And as the dark tide rises through the forests of the Holy Roman Empire, another kingdom prepares to meet the storm, not with reason, but with ritual. A hush settles over the rolling hills of Alsace, like a soft grey veil laid upon the land. Vineyards that once glowed emerald under the sun now droop with silent vines. The neat rows of grapes stand undisturbed, their leaves whispering of harvests that will never come. The morning mist drifts in from the Rhine, curling through abandoned cottages and empty barns. Doors hang open, as if waiting for hands that will not return. In the villages, thatch rooftops, once alive with children's laughter, fall quiet. Chickens roam aimlessly through narrow lanes, pecking at dust stirred by no passerby. A single church bell tolls at dawn, fewer times than before, and even its voice seems wary. Beneath it, wooden benches sit half, filled with those who remain, but their eyes hold distant grief. They pray for relief, for mercy, but the prayers grow thinner with each passing day. Beyond the fields, the forest grows bold. Oaks and beeches stretch their limbs out over empty tracks, as though to cover the scars of human toil. Moss climbs the stones of old milestones until the carved letters vanish beneath its hush. Wolves venture closer to the hamlets, testing doors and windows. Their howls echo like echoes of ancient fear. Not hunger, but curiosity, probing the vanished world of men. In Bavaria, farmsteads stand deserted. Plows rest in furrows cold and untouched. Horses nibble at overgrown grass, their flanks gaunt with missed feedings. The woodcutters cease their work. The forest reclaims clearings where pine and spruce once yielded to land. Smoke no longer curls from chimneys. Even the wind seems to wander confused, searching for tracks that vanish beneath fallen leaves. And deep in the heartland, the spirit of community fractures. Where neighbours once gathered to thresh grain and share all, the fields lie divided by suspicion. A black cross on a door marks a family lost to sickness. No one dares to cross that threshold. No one dares to whisper their names. The rhythms of shared labour, sowing, reaping, celebrating, slow to a stuttering cadence, then stop altogether. The plague does not rush here. It drifts, like quiet ash on a breeze, touching life where it may. It favours no rank, no prayer. A countess in her manor falls as swiftly as a shepherd in his hut. Servants in wood Beamed kitchens shudder in fevered sleep. Noble ladies cling to pillows drenched in sweat. The sickness is blind, but its cloak is dark and wide. Yet in this stillness, small acts of courage emerge. A travelling barber surgeon makes rounds between villages on a borrowed mule, carrying poultices and whispered hope. He leaves remedies at doorsteps, stepping back into the shadows before anyone dares to thank him. In a remote abbey, a handful of monks open their scriptorium to copy prayers for the dying. Not for fame or reward, but to bind memory with ink so that no soul is lost to silence. Elsewhere, in market towns once thrumming with trade, millers grind grain alone. Their mills creak at the mercy of the river's current, unaccustomed to solitude. In empty squares, a lone troubadour plays a lament on a dulcimer, his notes drifting through shuttered windows. He sings of sorrow, yes, but also of endurance, a soft reminder that even when the world is still, art can move hearts. For some, fear becomes a fortress. Entire families seal themselves behind barricaded doors, rationing bread and water. They refuse to speak even through windows. They reason that to halt breath and movement is to starve the sickness itself. But in these silent houses, loneliness seeps in. Children press faces to glass, searching for playmates who will not appear. Elders rock in empty armchairs, clutching rosaries, no longer able to bridge the gap between life and death. In towns where lords once held court, justice grinds to a halt. Courts close, disputes linger unresolved, debts go uncollected. The machinery of feudal life slows to a halt. Peasants remain on land until they cannot rise. Bailiffs no longer press rents. The social contract unravels as surely as the bodies piled in unmarked mass graves. Fields go untilled. Taxes fall silent, and yet, beneath the cloak of fear, seeds of change sprout. When the sickness finally retreats, as it must, though none can say when, the survivors will find land unclaimed, crops unharvested, barns unfilled. They will reckon with a new balance of power. Fewer labourers, more land, fewer tenants, more opportunity. The old hierarchies, once so rigid, will tremble under the weight of absence. Voices long unheard will rise to fill the silence, but that is a dream of tomorrow. For now, the trees stretch farther, the wind carries colder whispers, and the fields lie hushed under an unseen shadow. The fabric of rural life, woven for centuries, unthreads with gentle inevitability. Fear has taken root deeper than infection, threading itself through every hearth and barn. Still, the land remembers how to breathe. The river runs beneath fallen branches. The sun warms the stones of the churchyard. In the quiet, one can hear a distant promise that life, like a river's current, flows on despite the dams we raise against it. As the heart of Europe lies draped in silence and the forests press closer, beyond these woods England prepares to draw its own shields, closing ports, tightening gates, and bracing for the tide of darkness still on the wind. The sea that separates England from the continent has never felt wider. It groans beneath overcast skies, restless with rumour. Fishermen in small boats squint toward the horizon, as if danger might take the shape of a sail or shadow. But the plague does not arrive as storm or war. It drifts silently, not across borders but into breath. Word reaches London by whisper first. From sailors, from merchants, from monks. They speak of death in Venice, silence in Paris, the dark tide rolling through the empire. Some dismiss it as distant misfortune, a sorrow for other lands. Others begin to shutter windows. But then a ship docks at Melcombe Regis, quiet in the fog. It carries goods, sailors, and something unseen. Within days, a household falls ill, then a street. Then a town. England, long used to watching storms crash on foreign shores, now turns inward. London, already a tangle of narrow lanes and crowded dwellings, grows tense. The Thames carries barges full of grain and wine, but also something heavier. Fear. Clerks in Westminster seal scrolls with trembling hands. Bakers leave fewer loaves on their stalls. A merchant crosses himself 3 times before touching coin. Monasteries, once sanctuaries of care, begin to close their doors. Some do so from wisdom, others from weariness. The monks who stay pray over empty cloisters, their chants echoing off stone walls like distant thunder. The scent of incense clings to the silence. In some abbeys, bell towers ring too often, not for vespers, but for graves. The roads grow strange. Pilgrims, once steady in their faith, hesitate at crossroads. Some turn back. Others press on, praying each step brings them farther from what haunts the world behind. A few carry relics or letters, clutching them as if holiness might hold back the dark. Along country lanes, peasants dig shallow graves behind cottages. The rhythm of rural life, so reap, rest, breaks apart. A man leaves his field half ploughed and never returns. A woman sings to her child and loses her voice before sunset. The sheep still graze. The wind still moves through the wheat. But something deeper has stilled. And yet, people continue. Not all in fear, some in duty. A midwife walks alone between villages, her hands stained with ash and rosemary. She cannot stop the dying, but she eases the leaving. A poet, his name lost to time, pens a short verse on the back of a ledger. It is not meant to last, but someone reads it, weeks later, and weeps. We follow a scribe named John as he carries messages between towns. His face is covered, his steps slow. He has already buried his wife. He continues anyway. Each scroll he delivers carries not just news, but hope that someone somewhere is still alive to read it. In Norwich, they toll the bells with measured grace, not too fast, not too loud, as if the sound itself might summon death more quickly. In Oxford, scholars attempt to calculate the distance between stars and sorrow. Their figures fail them, but they keep writing. Even in London, grey, teeming, trembling, life does not wholly vanish. A woman sings softly as she scrubs her threshold, not because she expects guests, but because her mother once said it keeps spirits away. A boy flies a kite in an empty field near Smithfield Market, its ribbon curling like a prayer. But the city tightens, the gates close, trade slows to a whisper. Courts halt proceedings, inns go dark. The Thames still moves, but fewer boats pass beneath the London Bridge. And far from the city, in a cottage pressed against the edge of the wood, a boy waits. He is no older than 9. His name is Thomas. His father left for town 3 days ago to fetch supplies. His mother followed the next morning to find him. The hearth has gone cold. The stew is untouched. The bread has gone hard on the table. Outside, a single sparrow hops along the windowsill, chirping into the stillness. Thomas sits on the stoop, his knees pulled to his chest, his face turned to the path that winds away between 2 oaks. He watches for a figure, for any sound that breaks the hush. His dog lies beside him, ears twitching with every wind-stirred leaf. The road remains empty. Night comes. A candle burns beside the boy, its flame small but steady. In that flicker lies the ache of waiting, not just for a parent, but for a world that once made sense, for footsteps, for comfort, for what was. And still the road lies bare. As Thomas waits in silence, the roads behind him grow longer and darker. But on distant hills, other footsteps rise, bare feet, bloodied backs. The flagellants are coming, and with them, the strange rituals born of desperation and unspoken dread. The roads are not silent anymore. In the distance, the sound arrives before the sight. The heavy chant, like thunder trying to speak, carried on the wind. It is slow, solemn, almost beautiful. Until it isn't. Until the rhythm of it becomes unsettling. Until you hear what follows the voices. The sharp crack of leather against flesh. They come barefoot through the muddy lanes, cloaked in white linen stained with old blood, the red soaked into the fabric like the memory of something once alive. Their faces are hidden beneath pointed hoods, only the eyes visible. Eyes sunken, fevered, desperate. Each man holds a scourge, a many-thonged whip tipped with knots or shards of bone. With each step forward, they strike themselves across the back, leaving trails of blood that snake down their sides and mingle with the rain and dust of the road. They are the flagellants, pilgrims of pain, apostles of suffering, and they believe the world is ending. The Black Death has made the invisible visible. Death no longer creeps in shadows or behind doors. It parades down alleys. It breathes through windows. It sits beside mothers at cradles. Whispers to bishops during Mass, watches silently from the corners of every room. And in this collapsing world, some seek not escape but atonement, not for the body, but the soul. They believe the plague is not nature but punishment, a divine fire for sins long left smouldering. And so they march in long processions from city to city through the valleys of the Holy Roman Empire, across the crumbling market towns of Bohemia, through the flowered fields of France. They leave behind whispers, crowds, fear, and the bitter, metallic scent of human blood. Their rituals are strange and scripted. They form circles in the town square or within the nave of a church emptied by dread. As bells toll, the same bells rung for death. They fall to their knees in rows. Some stretch their arms out like Christ. Some press their faces to the stones. And with breath held between chants, they rise and strike. Again, and again, and again. Each lash a cry into the storm of suffering. Each wound a prayer written in red. Onlookers gather, drawn by the spectacle, by the horror, by the hope that perhaps this suffering might save them too. Some weep. Some kneel beside the flagellants. Some throw coins, or tear their own clothes, or whisper names of the dead into the wind. The flagellants do not speak to the crowd. Their words are for heaven. Their bodies are their sermons. They travel in bands of dozens, sometimes hundreds. They follow rules as strict as monasteries, their lives reduced to fasting, ritual, and the lash. No contact with women, no money of their own, no comforts. Only movement, only pain, and a belief that through their suffering the world might be spared. But not all see them as saviours. The Church, at first uncertain, begins to grow uneasy. These processions are unsanctioned, their teachings strange. They begin to draw crowds away from the clergy, offer penance outside the sacraments. The Pope, isolated in Avignon, watches with alarm. For what begins as penance risks becoming heresy, and what was once pain becomes power. Some cities welcome them. Others shut their gates, but the flagellants find ways in, through secret paths, through sympathetic abbots, through citizens who believe salvation may yet bleed its way into being. Still, not even suffering grants immunity. Among the flagellants, too, the plague finds purchase. Bodies weaken. Wounds fester. The scourges carry not only the hope of absolution, but the blood of the dying, and so their march becomes a grim mirror of what they seek to cure. A mobile contagion, both spiritual and physical. Their ranks swell then falter. By 1350, their movement has begun to fade. Edicts are issued. Cities refuse them entry. The Pope condemns them. Some disappear into monasteries, some vanish into legend, and some, perhaps, still walk, silent, broken, alone, seeking a grace the world never promised. But even as the flagellants fall into silence, their memory lingers. In the scratched wood of ruined chapels, in the blood-stained walls of roadside inns, in the folk songs whispered in the dark, they remain. A reminder of how fear can birth devotion, of how suffering seeks meaning, of how the human spirit, when pushed to its edge, will bleed itself just to feel clean. Because when death touches everything, even pain begins to feel holy. And sometimes the only prayer left is the one written in the body. Some wounds heal, others echo, and in that echo, fear finds new shapes. It begins with a whisper, a cough in the next house, a child who won't wake, a cart moving too quickly down the alley, carrying a shape shrouded in linen. And someone, no one remembers who, asks the question, why is this happening? The air is heavy with loss. Graves overflow. Churches echo with unanswered prayers. The plague moves like mist, unseen, but everywhere. And the human soul, so desperate for reason, reaches not for silence, but for blame. In the town square, rumours begin to bloom like bruises. They say the wells have been poisoned. They say the bread was cursed. They say the Jews, so long separate, so long strange, have brought this upon us. And soon the whispers become words, accusations. Then fire. Across Europe, the fear of plague fuses with old prejudice. An ancient distrust is reborn as fury. in Strasbourg, in Basel, in Mainz, and Barcelona. Jewish communities are accused of conspiring with the devil, of bringing death into the drinking water, of spreading disease through sorcery and shadow. It doesn't matter that they die too. It doesn't matter that mothers cradle lifeless children the same way, that husbands bury wives with the same trembling hands, that their prayers are just as urgent, just as unanswered. It matters only that they are not us. And in a time when God feels far away, difference becomes danger. In Basel, the entire Jewish community is forced into a wooden structure built by the river. It is called a house, but it is not meant for shelter. The doors are locked, the flames are lit, and within minutes, hundreds perish, the crackling fire drowning out the screams. They call it a purification, they call it justice, but it is neither. It is grief, lost and rudderless, turning inward and outward at once. A grief that wears a mask of righteousness, but burns only with fear. In Strasbourg, on a cold February morning in 1349, 2,000 Jews are herded into a cemetery and offered a choice: convert or die. Most refuse. They are marched to a platform and burned alive. Witnesses say some sang psalms as the flames rose. Others say the sky stayed clear, as if heaven had turned its face. These are not the only cities. Cologne, Brussels, Erfurt. Entire communities vanish overnight, some through exile, some through fire, some through silence. Synagogues are destroyed. Torahs are torn. Homes are seized and resettled. Those who survive scatter, leaving behind only gravestones and ghosts. And the plague does not stop. No fire purifies it. No death deters it. The scapegoats burn, but the sickness stays. The irony is sharp, and history does not forget. Centuries later, documents will be uncovered. Confessions taken under torture. Forced testimonies written by broken hands. Some Jews, desperate to save their families, admit to crimes they never committed. Others refuse to speak at all, choosing dignity even at the threshold of death. But it is not just the flame that wounds. It is the silence of neighbours. It is the priest who looks away, the merchant who steps aside, the child who learns, too young, that justice bends when fear walks in. Even in cities where Jewish physicians once healed the sick, where scholars taught beside Christian counterparts, where moneylenders held towns afloat in times of famine, even there the walls close in. And after the ashes settle, what remains? Not just the absence of those who lived there, but the rupture of trust, the hollowed out neighbourhoods, the names removed from ledgers, the songs no longer sung at dusk, a Europe made smaller, narrower, dimmer, not by the plague alone, but by the hate it helped awaken. This, too, is part of the Black Death's legacy. Not only the toll in bodies, but in the human heart. Fear, when left untended, ferments into fury, and that fury, like the plague itself, does not choose its victims fairly. It chooses them visibly. It seeks symbols. It devours difference. Yet even amid the horror, there are exceptions. Quiet stories that history only whispers. A mayor who hides a Jewish family in his cellar. A nun who smuggles bread past city guards. A village that closes its gates not to exile, but to protect. These acts are rare, but they glow. And they remind us that while fear is contagious, so too is courage. In the end, the plague leaves behind more than grief. It leaves wounds that cannot be seen on the skin. Wounds carved into memory, into ancestry, into the long, winding stories of those who survive not only disease, but persecution. And long after the fires die down, the smoke lingers. Smoke rises from the ashes of trust. And even as the embers cool, another silence spreads. For in cities now emptied, where neighbours turned away, the streets begin to whisper not of blame, but of absence. The gates are open, but no one enters. The markets are still, though their awnings flutter gently in the wind. And the bells that once marked every hour of labour, of worship, of feasting and mourning, hang quiet in their towers, waiting for hands that will never return. This is not a city in battle. No invaders march through the streets. No walls crumble under cannon fire. And yet, it has fallen. The plague does not raze cities with fire. It unravels them from within. Florence, once golden with trade and crowned with art, is quiet. The fountains still run, but no one drinks. The great palazzi sit shuttered, their halls echoing only with the dust of vanished footsteps. Vendor stalls remain standing, their wares long since picked over by birds and time. Grass grows between the stones where carriages once clattered. Ivy creeps along windowsills like hands searching for someone. And the pigeons outnumber people now, gathering in flocks where congregations once stood. This is not the silence of peace, it is the silence of absence. In Siena, the great cathedral remains unfinished, its white marble spine rising skyward, abruptly cut short. The builders died mid-hammer swing. The stones wait for voices that never return. There are no more apprentices to carve the saints. No masters to teach them. Only a shell of ambition now. Haunted by intention, Rome too dims. The eternal city, once roaring with carts and crowds and sermons, feels strangely paused, as if history itself has taken a breath and chosen not to exhale. Pilgrims no longer arrive. The Tiber runs, but carries no boats. The taverns that once spilled laughter into alleys now serve only echoes. Even Venice, swan-like and floating, knows stillness. Its canals mirror empty balconies. The gondoliers have no songs left to sing. This is not a sudden collapse, but a slow undoing. A peeling back of life layer by layer, as if the cities themselves are receding, drawing inward, becoming shadows of what they once were. And yet, something stirs in the silence, something not loud, but weighty. Memory, every empty home holds the scent of its last meal. Every schoolhouse, the faint scratches of chalk on walls. Letters lie unfinished on desks. Shoes rest by doors, still waiting. It is the details that ache. The ordinary pieces of life left behind. There are those who return. Widows searching for loved ones. Children too young to understand why no one answers the door. A few monks, a few farmers, a few brave or broken souls who wander back to familiar streets, hoping to find remnants of before. They walk the lanes like ghosts in reverse, the living haunting the dead. They light candles in churches where prayers once rose like steam. They tend to gardens in courtyards where voices once called down from balconies. But it is slow, so very slow. Cities are not only stone and timber, they are breath and laughter and argument, and footsteps echoing from wall to wall. And when those sounds fall away, what remains is more than ruin. It is grief made architectural. Historians will call this depopulation. They will count the cities that lost half, 3/4, even 90% of their people. They will record names, dates, ledgers of property abandoned, but no number captures the feeling of standing in a cathedral where not a single candle burns. And yet, amid the stillness, something gentle lingers. Not hope exactly, but something like it. In Paris, a street performer quietly sets up his lute beside a shuttered bakery. In Cologne, a woman plants rosemary along a crumbled wall, the scent rising like remembrance. In Avignon, a boy scribbles shapes in the dust with a broken stick, as if redrawing the world from scratch. Life is stubborn. Even in the death of cities, it waits. And in time, not now, but later, doors will reopen, streets will fill, voices will return. But the memory of this silence, it will linger. Cities remember, too. They carry the echoes of every footfall, every farewell, every forgotten name. They are palimpsests, layered with joy, with ruin, with resilience. And just as stones hold warmth after the sun sets, these empty cities carry the memory of the people who once made them sing. In the hush between stone and sky, the cities sleep, but beneath their silence lies something deeper still, a question not of emptiness, but of the names no longer spoken. At first, the cemeteries are enough. The priests read the rites. The families gather. There is time for names to be spoken, for tears to be shared, for shovels to follow slowly behind the tolling bell. The land receives its dead gently, as it always has, one by one, with reverence. But soon the rhythm breaks. There are too many bodies now, too many names, too little time. Graves multiply, spreading like ink across parchment. In Florence, entire orchards are cleared to make space. In London, common pits are dug wide and deep, covered hastily with lime. The bells toll without pause, and even they begin to falter. The sound no longer mournful, but mechanical. The rituals bend under the weight of numbers. Priests grow hoarse. Coffins are reused or left behind entirely. And the names, once the sacred core of mourning, begin to vanish. Not from memory at first, but from record. There is no one left to write them down. No parchment dry enough to hold the ink. No hands steady enough to trace the final letters. And so the world begins to bury its dead without words. A man digs a grave for his wife and children and does not mark it. Not for lack of love, but for fear of what else the earth may yet demand. A sister dies in a convent, her face still warm when she is wrapped in cloth and laid beside others, unnamed and unblessed. A child disappears into a trench, his name whispered once by his mother before the shovel covers his breath. They are not forgotten in the heart, but in the world that keeps count, they are. This chapter of the plague is not only about death, but about disappearance. Entire families vanish from the census. Villages lose all their elders, and with them, the keepers of stories, the tailors, the midwives, the masons. Each one gone, their crafts silenced. Sometimes there is no one left to speak the names, and in that silence, grief becomes not louder, but heavier. In Avignon, carts move by moonlight, filled with corpses, no prayers, no bells, only the creak of wheels and the soft thud of limbs. A friar there tries to record the dead in a single volume, a book of remembrance. By the 5th month, the ink runs dry and the book closes unfinished. In Lübeck, the graveyards are so full the living begin to dig on the outskirts. In fields, in ditches, in the forest edge where no markers can be kept. Some lay stones. Others trust the trees to remember. But trees do not speak our names. They remember differently. Still, the human spirit resists forgetting. In a village in the Alps, a shepherd carves a row of initials into bark. In Catalonia, a girl weaves black ribbons into the grass where her brother lies. In Prague, a mason scratches small crosses onto the side of a wall, one each day, until his hand can no longer hold the chisel. These acts are small, but they are sacred. They are the last reach of memory before silence takes hold, and silence is what most remain with. It is strange, isn't it? How we understand a life not only by its span, but by its name. A single word spoken at birth, again in love, again in anger, and again in mourning. Without it, we vanish not just from paper, but from the shared memory of the world. The anonymous dead of the Black Death did not choose to be unnamed. They were unmarked by necessity, by chaos, by the speed at which the world unravelled. But they lived, they laughed, they laboured, they stood under sun and rain and spoke words we will never hear. They held the world once, just as we do now, and even if no plague remembers them, the air does, the land does. The stones beneath their feet remember the rhythm of their walking. The rivers remember the weight of their reflection. And perhaps, just perhaps, so do we. When we light a candle in a quiet room, or speak softly into the dark, or feel the sudden sorrow of a name we never knew. Maybe we are closer to them than we think. In the centuries to come, great tombs will be built. Monuments will rise. Histories will name kings and martyrs, poets and warriors. But this chapter, this quiet, harrowing chapter, belongs to those without such honours, to the unnamed, to the ones buried in haste and in silence, to the ones whose stories ended before they could be told. It is not history's habit to pause for such souls. But tonight, we do. We pause not with grand gestures, but with stillness. We breathe their memory back into the world, not as facts, but as feeling. We do not know their names, but we know they were here. Beneath unmarked earth, the nameless rest. But grief does not always need a name, and northward, where the cold winds blow, even the most distant lands will soon remember the plague's touch. The snow falls softly on the northern fields, not in a rush, not in a flurry, but like ash from a distant fire, floating down as if the heavens have grown weary. in the villages of Poland, in the deep woods of Bohemia, in the frost-bitten ports of Sweden and Norway, life continues, but with a hush beneath its rhythm. The stories from the south come slowly, tied to the hooves of weary horses and the masts of creaking ships. They say cities have emptied, that priests drop mid-prayer, that children vanish like smoke. At first, these are tales, folklore carried in satchels and whispered in alahouses. The North has always lived by rumour, shaped by long winters, distant kings, and forests too deep for maps. But now the rumours come with names, dates, grief. It is no longer just a sickness. It is the sickness. In Riga, merchants speak with trembling hands of Italian ports where men dropped dead in the streets. In Gdansk, sailors arriving from Lubeck speak of entire families found stiff in their beds, the doors barred by neighbours too frightened to enter. And yet, the land remains quiet. For a time, perhaps the plague will die in the cold, the hopeful say. Perhaps it is a southern curse, one that will melt before it reaches snow and pine. But death, it seems, is no respecter of climate. It arrives not as a flood, but as a frost, slowly, invisibly, creeping under doors and through the seams of wool cloaks. In the wooden halls of Novgorod, traders begin to cough. In Stockholm, a priest does not rise from morning prayers. In the eastern reaches, near the steppes, a monastery is found silent, the bells still hanging, the bowls still warm. There is no ceremony to its coming, no thunder, no black clouds, only silence, only absence. A child's toy left in the snow, a baker's oven still glowing, but no bread within. In Denmark, the king prays. In Norway, the bishop fasts. In the deep Finnish woods, the Sami speak of spirits displeased, of winds that carry sorrow. But whether wrapped in crown or bone charm, no one is spared. It is a strange grief that comes to the north. Here, in these colder lands, death is already a companion. From wolves, from famine, from the long night that swallows the sun for months at a time. But this is different. This is not the death of accident, of hunger, of war. This is a death that listens, waits, moves like breath between trees. The wooden churches fill with incense. The old hymns echo against beams cut centuries ago. Yet fewer voices rise with each passing week. Some believe it is punishment. Others believe it is chance. Most do not know what to believe. In Lithuania, a village closes its gates. No one enters. No one leaves. By spring, birds nest in its rafters. The people are gone. The north does not scream as the cities of Italy did. It does not flood the records with pleas as Paris or Florence. It watches, waits, endures in silence. In the marshes near Pomerania, a fisherman rows out at dawn, his boat empty. His net returns heavy, not with fish, but with the waterlogged satchel of a traveller inside. A letter never sent, stained with something darker than ink. In Estonia, a young girl dreams of fire. She wakes alone. In the highlands of Slovakia, an elder carves runes into a doorframe. Protection, he whispers. Protection from the thing no one can see, but all can feel. When the roads freeze and the rivers harden, the plague moves slower, but it does not stop. In Prague, the astronomers search the sky for signs. In Krakow, university halls grow quiet. In the silence, thoughts become louder. What is this thing that passes through keyholes and skin? What is this sorrow that does not shout, but settles like snow? By summer, the frost retreats, but the silence remains. And where there is silence, there is change. Children now play differently, keeping distance, avoiding touch. Traders count their coins more slowly, wondering if gold can protect against ghosts. A farmer stands alone in his field and watches the wind. He does not know where it came from or where it will go next. But he knows this. The world is no longer untouched. The North, once distant, once apart, has been folded into the same dark tapestry that drapes all of Europe. The rats, the fleas, the ships, they do not know borders, and now neither does grief. And so, as the sun finally lingers longer in the sky and the fields begin to green again, there is no celebration, only quiet, only memory, and a question left unspoken: if this has reached even here, where will it go next? Beyond the snows and forests, southward and westward, prayers are cracking like old plaster, and altars stand unanswered. In lands once certain of salvation, a different silence now grows. Not of death, but of doubt. And so we turn toward what the soul does when its gods fall silent, toward the shiver of faith, beginning to fracture. The bells still ring, but not with the certainty they once held. Their sound travels through empty courtyards and down streets lined with silence, calling the faithful to kneel before something that no longer feels near. Across Europe, the Church has long been the heart of the world. It blesses the seed and the harvest, the birth and the burial. It crowns kings and hears confessions. Its cathedrals rise like stone prayers carved toward the heavens. But now, in the wake of a plague no sacrament can stop, cracks begin to appear. Not in the marble, but in the soul. In city after city, the clergy fall as quickly as the laity. Parish priests tend to the dying, only to die days later. Nuns who once washed the feet of lepers now lie unwashed themselves. Bishops retreat to countryside estates, distant, protected, silent. And the people see. They watch as the holy fall, as relics fail, as indulgences burn in hearths that cannot warm the body. The faith once offered answers. Now it offers absence. In Paris, theologians debate whether God is angry or simply indifferent. In Florence, some flagellate themselves in public squares, backs open like pages. In England, others stop attending Mass altogether, choosing instead to bury their dead alone, wrapping them in sheets and prayers of their own making, not rebellion. Not yet. Just a quiet turning, a flickering. In rural villages, where the Church has always been the centre of life, people begin to wonder if a priest can die mid-sermon who holds the keys to heaven. If holy water carries sickness, where is the line between sacred and cursed? If God hears, why does he not answer? And so, private grief grows. A woman sits by her child's bed, her rosary falling still in her lap, not because she stops believing, but because she no longer knows how to believe. The words once spoken with reverence now feel hollow in her mouth, like wind trapped in stone. In a crumbling monastery in Bavaria, a monk writes in the margins of a psalter, "The Lord is my shepherd, but the wolves walk freely. It is not blasphemy, it is sorrow. It is the quiet confession of a heart that still longs to believe, but no longer knows where to rest its hope. The great cathedrals remain, their windows catching light that falls on fewer faces. Chants echo through cloisters with more echoes than voices. In Rome, the Pope survives, barricaded, isolated, unreachable. He proclaims fasts, he orders processions, but his voice is distant, like thunder too far away to stir the leaves. For some, this distance becomes a wound. For others, a doorway. The space left by faltering faith does not remain empty. Into it walks doubt, not as a storm, but as a shadow, soft, silent, persistent. And with it comes something new, a personal faith, a private reckoning, a whispered prayer not to saints in glass, but to something more intimate, less defined. In the Low Countries, mystics begin to write, not in Latin, but in the vernacular. They speak of an inner Christ, of a divine presence found not in cathedrals, but in candlelit solitude. In Hungary, a farmer carves crosses into his doorframe, not by order of a priest, but by instinct. It is not the end of belief, but it is not beginning of a shift. The church still holds power, it still crowns kings. But it no longer crowns certainty. Faith begins to feel more like memory, beautiful, aching, distant. A song half remembered from childhood, still sung, but with unsure words. A young scribe in Avignon records the deaths of 3 abbots in 1 week. In the margins, he draws a feather, and beneath it he writes, "The soul is light, but even feathers fall. Still, even in this dimming candles are lit. Some still kneel, some still believe, fiercely, desperately, and others find new paths not to reject, but to reshape, not to abandon the divine, but to search for it in silence." The Black Death does not destroy the church, but it alters the way people reach for God. Where once belief was a great tower, stone, unshaken, it now becomes a lantern, carried, tended, flickering, a faith less about command, more about comfort, less about power, more about presence, not louder, but deeper. And in that depth, something else stirs, a restlessness, a question, a wondering if truth lies only in tradition or somewhere else. But for now, in this chapter of loss and quiet prayers, the soul still searches, still listens, still waits beneath dimming spires, and as belief flickers in the quiet hollows of the soul, something else stirs beneath the weight of centuries. A shift not of faith, but of foundation. For in this silence, the people begin to feel the world not only as it is, but as it could be. And from that feeling, rebellion begins to root. The air no longer smells of smoke. The wheels of the death carts no longer groan down cobbled lanes. For the first time in months, or was it years, the wind moves through the streets without carrying screams. The world has not healed, but it has paused, held still in the wake of something unthinkable. Across Europe, the doors swing open slowly, not with celebration, but with caution, like waking from a dream where the walls breathed and the sky bled. Fields lie untended, gone to seed. Cottages sag with rot and ivy. Parish records are blank, as if time itself skipped a beat. And yet, beneath the ash of what was, something grows. A widow in the countryside kneels by her garden, not in prayer, not this time. She touches the soil, turns it with her fingers. The same fingers that buried her children now press seeds into the earth. The land is quieter now, but not empty. Birdsong returns before bells. Sunlight returns before sermons. And in that stillness, the living begin to wonder. Not only who they are now, but what kind of world they've stepped into. Before the plague, life followed the old grooves. Feudal bonds, sacred calendars, the rhythms of those long buried. Now those patterns feel foreign. Who owns the land? When the Lord lies buried beneath it, who commands loyalty when the priests are gone? Who defines truth when the old voices are silent? There is grief still, deep and bitter, but it is no longer the sharp edge of immediate loss. It is a hollowing, a reshaping. And in that space, change begins to breathe. In towns where half the doors are shuttered, those who remain speak more softly, as if the air itself is fragile. They share bread again. They rebuild fences. They plant without knowing if there will be a harvest. But still they plant. In Siena, a child begins to paint. Not saints or angels, but faces. Real faces. Those she remembers, those she still sees. Her brush carries not doctrine, but memory. In Bruges, a weaver opens her shuttered shop. Not because she expects business, but because the loom must keep turning. Thread, she says, is what keeps her hands from trembling. And in Paris, a student returns to an emptied hall. His teachers are gone, so he writes in the margins of their old texts, questions, theories, dreams. The world after plague is not a world of answers, but it is a world of possibility. For the first time in living memory, there is space. Space between deaths. Space between feasts. Space to think, to wonder, to rearrange. Not all seek change. Some cling to the old structures, desperate for the comfort of certainty. But others, quietly, hesitantly, begin to reimagine. A mason chooses to carve a different arch, not because it is required, but because it feels right. A midwife begins keeping notes about births, about herbs, about hope. In the silence left by sermons, people begin to speak to one another, not through scripture, but through shared loss. There is something beautiful in this brokenness, not heroic, not triumphant, but real, like a candle found unburned in the ruins. Time feels slower now, measured not by chimes or taxes, but by the pace of healing. There are no parades, no declarations of victory, only the quiet recognition that they are still here, still breathing, still capable of love. The roads are overgrown, but footsteps begin to trace them again. A merchant loads his cart not with silks, but with salt and grain, things that keep people alive. A grandmother tells stories she barely believes herself, about a world before the sickness. And the child who listens doesn't remember that world, but holds the story as if it were a seed. And so, the world turns again. not back to what it was, but toward what it might become. Gravestones outnumber rooftops now, and yet, in their shadow, new stones are being laid. Not just to bury, but to build. The past still lingers, in empty chairs, in folded linens untouched since spring, in the way people flinch at a cough. But it is no longer the only presence. Now there is music again. Faint, unsure. Played not for courts, but for comfort. Sung not in Latin, but in lullabies. Now there is movement. Hesitant steps across ground once avoided. Hands reaching not for relics, but for one another. The world the plague left behind is not whole, but it is alive. And that is something. That is everything. And in the quiet after death, as fields stir beneath spring light, the survivors begin to wonder, if the old world fell, who will shape the new one, and whose hands will hold the tools? The fields lie waiting, not for lords, not for kings, but for hands, calloused, cracked, and still alive. Once, a man owed everything: his labor, his body, his future. The land belonged to another. The bread he baked fed someone else's table. The child he raised bowed to someone else's name. But now, the manor house stands empty. Its tapestries gather dust, its hearth cold. The overseer is gone. The priest, buried. The steward's seal hangs untouched beside an open door. And the peasant? The one who buried the steward, who prayed not in Latin but in tears, still walks the land, in England, in France, in the patchwork of kingdoms and fiefs. A strange thing begins to happen. The labourer says no, not with banners, not with swords, but with silence, with absence. He does not report to the fields, or, if he does, he asks for more coin, more food, more time. For the first time in generations, he is needed. Desperately, the lords look down from their hills and see not land but labour unfilled. The harvest cannot reap itself, the mills do not turn for the dead, and so the peasants rise, not in rebellion, not yet, but in quiet negotiation, in stubborn refusal, in choosing which field to till and which path to walk. In the counties of southern England, wages creep upward. In Flanders, men leave their villages to work in towns, not from desperation, but from choice. Choice. That word rings new in their mouths, heavy, sacred. The statutes come swiftly. Laws to fix wages, to bind workers, to restore the order that once ruled. But laws written in ink cannot bind a world written now in ash, and the people know it. In 1351, England passes the Statute of Labourers, demanding a return to pre-plague wages. But who will enforce it when even sheriffs bury their own dead with trembling hands? Across Europe, the same pattern flickers like firelight in windland lies idle. Labour is rare, and for the first time, the poor begin to understand their value. They do not call it revolution, they call it living, breathing, choosing, but underneath something deeper grows, a restlessness, a reckoning. In manors, in markets, in meadows, rumours pass between hands like coins. That somewhere someone demanded better. That somewhere a man walked away from the plough and was not punished. In the German principalities, peasants gather in chapels to read aloud forbidden texts. In Florence, guilds hold secret meetings. In Normandy, a boy steals a lord's seal and signs a charter of rights in his own name. The land is no longer just a place of toil. It becomes a mirror of power, of inheritance, of worth. And for those who have always bent beneath it, the mirror now reflects something new, possibility. In the quiet ruins of feudal certainty, people begin to imagine that life could be different. That God does not only favor the noble, that work is not shame but dignity. A field is still a field, but now it can belong to the one who sows it. The ruling class sees the shift, and they are afraid not of armies, but of abandonment. For what is a king if no one kneels? What is a lord without hands to command? And so, the powerful respond as they always have, with law, with force, with fear. But fear does not root deeply in those who have already buried everything, and memory does not fade for those who have seen the world emptied and rebuilt. In 1381, the whisper becomes a cry. A tax, meant to bind the peasantry again, ignites the English countryside. The peasants revolt. It is swift, it is furious, it is unforgettable. But even where revolt does not rise, change does. Softly, persistently, like moss on old stone. And in time, the land itself begins to shift. Serfdom weakens. Tenant farmers gain rights. The old chains rust in forgotten ledgers. The plague took bodies. But in its wake, it gave something strange: leverage. Not for all, not forever, but enough to begin a slow unbinding. And so, the labourers take the land, not with fanfare, not with conquest, but with hands in soil, with backs unbowed, with voices no longer silenced by hunger. They take the land by surviving, by returning, by refusing to disappear, and in doing so, they plant more than crops. They plant a new world. And as the fields turn beneath freer hands, a whisper lingers in the wind. What else might rise from the soil of loss? And could the very plague that emptied Europe also be the root of its becoming? The carts stop rolling, but the wheels still creak in memory. The scent of ash and sickness fades from the air, yet lingers in the wood of doors and the stitching of old clothes. For a time, the world seems still again, not healed, not whole, but breathing. And then the breath shortens once more. It begins quietly, as it always does. A cough in the marketplace, a child who won't wake, a corner of the city where the shutters stay closed too long. People glance sideways, listen for bells, and feel that old, cold pull of fear stirring in their blood. For though the first wave passed, the plague has not ended. It only sleeps, it waits, in fabric, in fleas, in silence. It knows the roads now, knows how to travel. It knows how to knock without warning and enter without permission. The years stretch, but not in peace. 1361, 1369, 1374. Again and again the sickness returns, not with the same ferocity, but with the same cruelty. It comes for children now. It comes in winter. It comes in dreams. Each time, the world holds its breath. This is not a single wound, but a rhythm of wounding. The people begin to live in shadows of recurrence. A boy grows up with a grave beside his cradle. A baker learns to knead dough while watching the streets for the priest's cloak. a midwife delivers a child and wonders if the name will ever be remembered. Some try to explain it. They blame the winds or water or wandering strangers. They burn herbs in their homes and mark their doors with crosses. The church offers prayers, but with each return, those prayers feel thinner, more like whispers than proclamations. In some towns, the plague becomes almost seasonal, like a cruel winter, expected but still unwelcome. There are fewer mass graves now, fewer cries from the bell towers. But the silence carries a new weight, acceptance. This is the age of quiet endurance, of women who bury 3 husbands, of children who never know a world without loss, of villages that learn to rebuild not once, but many times, each generation inheriting the rubble of the last. And yet life continues. Markets reopen, walls are repaired, songs are sung, not in joy, but in defiance. A lullaby is passed down that once soothed a fevered child. A story is told of a man who walked through the worst of it and still found love. Memory becomes both scar and shelter. In this recurring sickness, the world begins to change not just in fear, but in rhythm. Art becomes sharper, starker. Paintings show skeletons dancing with kings and peasants alike. Manuscripts are bound with margins full of skulls. The image of death becomes familiar, not to celebrate it, but to understand it, to tame it in some small way. And people begin to prepare. Cities appoint plague doctors even in years of calm. Laws are written for quarantine. Ships wait at anchor before docking, their passengers peering toward shore, uncertain if the land will welcome them or shut its gates. In Venice, a word is born. 40 giorni, 40 days. Quarantine. Even language bends to make room for the plague. There are those who believe this is the end of the world, not once, but over and over again. And yet, with each return, something in the soul of Europe hardens, not into cruelty, but into caution, into watchfulness, into the understanding that survival is not a single act, but a way of life. A woman ties herbs into a child's cloak. A monk copies a text by candlelight, pausing to cough. A merchant buries his profits in the ground and prays they will outlast the fever. They do not know if the plague will come again next year, but they know that if it does, they will face it, not with courage, exactly, but with remembrance, with muscle memory, with wary hope. And so the years pass. The plague returns and returns again, but each time it finds a people who bend, not break, who mourn, but also remember, who begin to see that living alongside uncertainty is itself a form of wisdom. This is the great lesson of recurrence, that history does not always move forward. Sometimes it circles, like the turning of a wheel or the return of a season. And in that circling, humanity learns a slower strength, not of conquest, but of resilience. The fields bloom again. The roads are travelled again. Children laugh, softer, perhaps, and never far from sorrow, but laugh nonetheless. The plague, like memory, becomes something the world carries, not as a constant wound, but as a rhythm, a dark pulse under the skin of time. And when the wind quiets and the fever fades, the survivors look not only to the ground, but to the sky. and begin to wonder what stories they will now tell, what new shapes the world might take. In that hush something stirs. Not the end, but the seed of art, of echo, of memory, and that is where we begin to listen for the song. In the stillness after morning, there is a need to speak, not loudly, but gently, to take the weight of memory and shape it into something that does not rot or vanish, something that can be passed from hand to hand, from voice to voice, like a candle in the wind. Art becomes that vessel. It begins in small ways. A carving on the side of a church pew, a skull tucked beside a blooming vine, a melody hummed by a mother who lost her husband but still rocks the cradle, a tapestry woven with dark threads, telling stories too heavy for words. People begin to place their sorrow in paint, in ink, in song. The dance macabre is born, the dance of death. In murals and manuscripts across Europe, skeletons twirl with the living. Kings and paupers, bishops and beggars, all clasping bony hands in a strange, swaying procession. There is no cruelty in it, only truth. The plague has reminded the world of its shared frailty. Art now reminds it too. Each figure in the dance wears a face of surprise, or calm, or resignation. The dead are not always fearsome. Sometimes they smile, sometimes they beckon gently. They are mirrors. They are reminders. They are the rhythm beneath the heartbeat of the age. Painters like Pieter Bruegel will later fill canvases with worlds touched by plague. Chaotic, beautiful, full of motion and stillness at once. In their layers we see not only suffering, but survival. A village reeling, a woman praying, a child watching. Stained glass windows in cathedrals shine with saints who healed the sick, who stood beside the dying. Their colours are bright, but their stories are heavy. The light that passes through them is touched by remembrance. And in the quiet of cottages and courtyards, the songs begin. Lullabies with strange lyrics about roses and ashes, about falling down and not rising. A rhyme passed down not for its truth, but for its tone. It soothes, even if its roots are shadowed. Ballads are sung in marketplaces and beside hearths. They tell of lost lovers, of empty roads, of a knight who returns to a town where no one remembers his name. The tunes are soft. The words ache. But they carry something vital. The memory of a world touched by the plague, but not swallowed by it. Scribes write chronicles not only of battles and kings, but of the dead. Lists of names, dates, weather, omens seen in the sky. These records are dry at times, but they hold grief between their lines. The kind of grief that only history can freeze, like frost on old stone. And poets, those listeners of silence, begin to write of love that ends before its time, of gardens once filled with laughter, of churches that echo with fewer footsteps. In their verses, the plague is not always named, but it is always near. A shadow in the second stanza, a pause between breaths. Even clothing becomes a kind of canvas. In some regions, black becomes the colour of the soul, not just of mourning. Jewellery is made in the shape of coffins, skulls, hourglasses. Memento mori, remember you must die. But also, remember you are alive. There is healing in creation, not a cure, but a balm, a way to carry what cannot be changed. Art allows the living to give shape to the unshapable, to draw borders around grief, to give it colour and form. It lets the silence speak. It lets the lost be seen. And in this, memory begins to soften. It does not vanish, but it no longer burns as it once did. It becomes part of the rhythm, part of the air. In monastery scriptoria, monks copy psalms and prayers, but sometimes, in the margins, they sketch strange little drawings. A dancing figure, a bird carrying a branch, a smiling skeleton. As if to say, even in our holy work we remember. Even in our sacred spaces, the plague has passed. The children grow, the cities rebuild. But the art remains. It hangs on the walls. It lives in the songs. It lingers in the lullabies passed from grandmother to grandchild, in languages that will one day fade, but never fully vanish. And so the plague is not only a story of loss, but a story of how the world chose to remember, not in grand monuments or marble tombs, though there are those, but in the quiet human things. A melody that won't leave your mind, a painting that watches you back, a phrase scratched into stone by someone whose name is lost, but whose pain was real. Memory, like art, does not need to shout. It waits quietly. It survives in corners. It softens sorrow with beauty and binds the broken edges with threads spun from the soul. Even as borders crumble and empires fall, memory remains, etched in song, drawn in pigment, whispered in rhyme. And just beyond the frame, just beneath the note, something else stirs, the slow shifting of nations, the quiet redrawing of lines, and the world, changed by sorrow, begins to reshape itself anew. A map is never still. Though we draw it in ink and mark it with borders and names, it is always in motion, shaped by war, by weather, by whispers. But now, in the years after the plague's first great sweep, the changes are quieter, deeper. Not made by the sword alone, but by absence, by what is no longer there. The land remembers the dead. Entire villages are gone, swallowed by time, reclaimed by weeds and roots. A thatched roof sags into the earth, its chimney the last to fall. Fields once crowded with workers now lie still, or are tilled by fewer hands. And where the labourers remain, their silence grows bold. Before the plague, power was pyramidal. Kings above lords, above peasants, fixed like stone. But death makes no distinction. It carves through every class, topples systems not with revolt, but with vacancy. There are fewer mouths now, and fewer backs to bear the burdens. And so the labourer rises not in rebellion, but in necessity. In England, wages climb. Fields lie fallow unless someone agrees to tend them. And those someones begin to realise their worth. The Statute of Labourers, passed in 1351, tries to pin the past in place, to freeze wages at pre-plague levels, to hold society in a shape no longer sustainable. But the tide has already shifted. Power begins to slip downward, not in a flood, but like sand through fingers. In towns, merchant guilds rise. Skilled artisans take up space once dominated by nobility. Trade routes reroute. The great cities, Florence, London, Paris, nurse their wounds and look outward again. Slowly, tentatively, they begin to pulse with life. Yet beneath all the rebuilding, something else has changed. Something harder to name. The spirit of Europe, once tethered tightly to the church and to the unquestioned order of things, begins to tremble. The plague has loosened those knots. It has exposed cracks in theology, in authority, in meaning itself. Faith, once a clear mirror, now reflects shadows. People begin to ask different questions. If death comes so easily, so arbitrarily, what does it mean to be chosen? To be good, to obey. The church still stands, but its walls feel colder, its answers more brittle, and into that spiritual gap, new thought creeps. Philosophy turns inward, literature blooms with self-reflection. The individual, once merely a thread in the communal fabric, starts to feel like something more, something singular, something worth listening to. Humanism stirs. In Italy, scholars look back to Rome and Greece, not to copy, but to remember, to recover a different way of being, one that centers thought, beauty, and the dignity of the human mind. It is not yet the Renaissance, but it is the breath before the song. Borders, too, begin to shift. Not just the ones on maps, but the ones within hearts and minds. National identities grow more distinct. France, ravaged by plague and war, starts to feel itself as something separate, not merely a kingdom, but a people. England, too, finds new footing, its language changing, its nobility fractured and reshaped. Languages evolve, dialects drift apart. What once united now begins to divide, not in anger, but in growth. Even the idea of Europe begins to stretch. Before, it was Christendom, one body under God. Now, cracks in that unity reveal new paths, trade routes into the east, questions from the south, ideas floating across the sea. The continent begins to see itself not just as one, but as many. A patchwork, a mosaic, and yet, in all this change, there is a deep and quiet grief. The world that was, its rhythms, its certainties, is gone. What replaces it is not yet fully formed. It trembles like a newborn fawn, blinking into the light of a future still uncertain. But the survivors, they do not retreat. They rebuild. They reimagine. A mason lifts his chisel again. A woman teaches her daughter to write. A cartographer redraws the coastlines, not just of land, but of understanding. This is the plague's final reshaping, not of bodies, but of belief. A belief in permanence shattered. A belief in control undone, but in their place a belief in endurance. In renewal, in the strange, solemn beauty of what remains, Europe emerges changed, not only in boundaries, but in soul. The maps are redrawn, yes, but so too are the inner landscapes of art, of meaning, of what it means to be human in a world that can vanish in a breath. And from this reshaped world, of shifting lines and trembling truths, the question begins to rise: what future might grow from such soil? In the hush between centuries, the soft drumbeat stirs once more, and something begins to walk forward into the light. The world does not begin again with trumpets or fanfare. It begins in silence, in the hush of fields left fallow, in the shadow of a doorframe where someone once stood. It begins with the sound of a single footstep on a road where many once walked, with the weight of a hammer raised not for war, but for rebuilding. The plague passes, but it does not leave. Its breath lingers in the memory of those who remain. In their hands, in their stories, in the way they now look at time. The survivors carry something new inside them. A quiet wisdom forged in sorrow. They know the shape of absence. They understand the language of loss. But they also begin to understand something else. Something born in the long aftermath. That life, even pared down to its barest shape, continues. That after the worst, people do not vanish. They adapt. They reimagine. They create not because the world is whole again, but because it is not. And that creation becomes the thread that binds the torn edges. The centuries ahead do not forget the plague. Its marks are stitched into law, into thought, into custom. The very systems that rise in its wake are shaped by its silence. Public health, once a vague concern of the few, becomes a duty of the many. Towns begin to build pest houses. Cities create health boards, quarantine protocols, warning bells. The idea that a government should care for its people's physical well-being, should intervene, should prevent, is not ancient. It is new, and it rises from the ash of the Black Death. Universities, shaken by the loss of their scholars, revise their teachings. Medicine shifts. Anatomy, long shadowed by taboo, steps into the candlelight. Dissection is no longer forbidden curiosity, but urgent necessity. The body becomes a map worth reading, and trade, once tangled in feudal ties, begins to flow more freely. Ports rebuild with caution and purpose. Markets reopen with new kinds of contracts, new rules of exchange. The merchant, once lesser than the knight, rises in esteem. Wealth begins to move differently, not only by bloodline, but by ambition, by strategy, by the will to risk. In this new rhythm, something gentle but seismic stirs the seed of modernity. Human life, brief, beautiful, precarious, becomes the center of thought. Painters begin to study the face not just as a symbol, but as a soul. Writers look inward. A poem becomes a window. A journal becomes a mirror. The inner world gains value equal to the outer one. And slowly, painfully, the world begins to open. It is no longer only the priest or the noble who speaks for history. The peasant, the widow, the orphan. Their lives, their labor, their losses begin to shape the path ahead. The village no longer waits for the decree from the castle. It starts to find its own voice. Revolts rise. Not many, not always successful, but enough to be noticed. Enough to shift the ground. And women, often overlooked in the chronicles, carry much of the weight. In medicine, in mourning, in food and faith, they hold the quiet knowledge of survival. Many begin to manage estates, businesses, land, because they must, and through necessity, autonomy takes root. In the East, in Constantinople and Cairo, the memory of plagues stretches back even further, braided into generations of resilience. Trade routes slow, then recover, and across the known world, patterns shift, not always for better, but undeniably different. The Americas, still untouched by Europe's black tide, remain unaware of the changes stirring across the Atlantic. But that distance will not last. The same currents that carried plague will one day carry ships bearing new sicknesses, new claims, new empires. The world is growing smaller, and in its shrinking, it changes. The people who remain after the Black Death are not the same as those before. Their children grow up in a world more aware of fragility, but also more determined, more curious, more willing to look both inward and outward, to question, to record. The printing press is still decades away, but its need is already pulsing in the veins of time. Knowledge once held tightly by the few aches to be shared. The idea that learning should move faster than disease begins to bloom. Even faith, though shaken, begins to evolve. The church survives, but not unscarred. Doubt is no longer hidden in shadows. It begins to speak, quietly at first, and in time, loudly. The Reformation will come. And though its roots are many, one of them is planted here. In the aftermath. In the ache for answers where there were none. From the silence of the plague, the future begins to hum. The Renaissance is not a leap, but a ripple. Not a golden age untouched by pain, but a rebirth cradled in grief. It does not erase the past, it grows from it, like green through stone. In Florence, a dome rises above the city, not in spite of the death that came before, but because of it. In Paris, new universities spread knowledge beyond the cloister. In London, theatres and printing presses give voice to laughter and lament alike. The Black Death did not destroy Europe. It changed it, bent it, reframed it, and in that reframing, a new world quietly began to assemble itself, not yet whole, not yet certain, but humming with possibility. A world where people begin to ask, what does it mean to live well, knowing life is short? What does it mean to be remembered, knowing most are not? What does it mean to be human in a world that forgets and begins again? And so, we return to the sound of footsteps, of candles lit in darkened rooms, of songs hummed beneath breath, of hands that, once emptied by grief, now reach again. To build, to write, to love. The plague came with silence, but in its wake, a soft drumbeat stirs, the quiet pulse of the future. Not all endings are final. Some echo forward, reshaping every step that follows. And perhaps, in the stillness between centuries, we hear it, the faintest rhythm beneath time's breath, the sound of tomorrow learning to walk. And so, the candle of that long, distant night burns quietly in time. Its flame, though flickered by sorrow, still glows with the fragile light of memory. We've walked tonight through silence and smoke, past shuttered cities and lonely roads, past the breathless rooms where names were whispered one last time, and into the soft, reshaped outlines of a world learning how to begin again. The Black Death was more than a sickness. It was a turning, a moment when the old world trembled and gave way, when hands once full of tools and prayers learned, in the absence of certainty, how to rebuild from the silence. Though centuries have passed, their echo still hums in the quiet. In every lullaby sung to calm grief, in every story passed down to remember the ones who were lost. And in every breath we take, unknowingly shaped by their survival. Thank you for sharing this quiet space with me tonight, for listening not just with your ears, but with your heart. Here, in this shared stillness, you are not alone. You are part of something timeless. A long thread of wonder, reaching gently through history and into this very moment. So now, dear soul, release the weight of the day. Let the story settle like dust on ancient stone. May your dreams carry you gently through the night, soft as footsteps on forgotten roads, deep as a bell's final toll beneath the stars. This has been the Sleeping Hourglass, where the past tucks you in. If this story brought you peace, you're always welcome to return. There are more echoes waiting, more candles waiting to be lit in the dark. But for now, let go. Rest well beneath the hush of history's lullaby and drift quietly into sleep.